Hello and welcome back for another episode of Great American Underdog, where we share stories of strength and success. Today, I'm honored and privileged to share the screen with somebody that I consider a brother in my life. He is also a beloved son, brother, former amateur boxer, triathlete, and district manager at Trek. It's my honor to welcome Matt Angstadt. Matt, how are you today, man?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of the podcast with you. And I look forward to having a great conversation.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, we're going to do what we normally do, which is chop it up about life, business, sports, all these different things. But really, for our audience, there's an incredible story that you have to share about your upbringing and some of the trials, tribulations you've been through in your own life, and definitely some real insights and lessons as a person, business professional, and as an athlete. So, just to get started, I start every episode like this. Tell me, what is your favorite underdog story, whether it's fictional or nonfiction? I'm sorry, fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah, so it's probably a fictional one. If you think back to Rocky One, the boxer in us, dude, right? So just think about the story of Rocky One, and and the fact that you think about him, he was a journeyman fighter, he was a nobody, right? Like, just a nobody. And he
Yeah.
had that opportunity to face Apollo Creed, and I remember like all the people that just thought he was nuts, had absolutely no shot of winning, and he goes in to have that fight, and the outcome of it just was like what nobody expected, right? And then he ends up becoming the champ, and you have the whole series of Rocky, and it's just for anybody that hasn't watched Rocky, should watch Rocky. But uh, yeah, you'll learn a lot. But that story alone, it resonates. The determination that you have to have as a person to be able to, achieve what you're looking to achieve. And even though it's fictional, there's probably so many other people that could relate to something just as similar to that as I know I have. So that would by far be my favorite underdog story.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, even though it's quote unquote fictional, things like that had happened in real life. It's kind of that David versus Goliath, story that exists in there with him versus the champ Apollo Creed. And, just the life lessons of just keep moving forward and not giving up, even if the odds are against you. It's part of the reason I made this channel to inspire others. And I obviously share the same sentiment, being that we both boxed together for many years and have shared the ring together. It's just definitely one of those that are on the top of my list as well. Matt, just out of curiosity, talk to me a little bit about, for the audience as well, where'd you grow up and what was some of your earliest memories, things that are really memorable from your childhood?
Yeah, man. So I moved to East Brunswick when I was 5. Before 5, honestly, dude, my memory's shot. I have no idea. Like, I have some small glimpses of my childhood, but moved to East Brunswick when I was 5. Grew up my entire life in East Brunswick until I met my current wife. But grew up in a family of 3 siblings, have mom and dad, and went through school, did my whole thing, and just I think some of the biggest childhood memories I had was just playing sports, being outside with friends, having a good inner circle group. We called ourselves the Live Strong players at the time, which was I'm sure you remember, like with Corey Muniz and Dom and Zach and all those folks back in school, supporting Corey through some of the times he went through. But we called ourselves the Live Strong players, play basketball together. It was just a great memories as a kid. And then, of course, the introduction of my life into the boxing gym at such a young age, at 13 years old, and having that be such a glue to my life for even to this day, right? So
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, number one, I didn't know about the camaraderie around Corey. I never really knew that story, and we could get to that at another time off camera. I don't want to spill somebody else's information. But pretty interesting to me that you had a core group of friends and you guys sound like you were really all there for each other. I'm just curious, was that probably the biggest challenge that even though it didn't happen to you directly, that you experienced in your younger years, or was there something else or anything else that was really stood out to you as a challenge early on in your life prior to boxing?
it was definitely a challenge to, just go through some of those things. But I think probably some of the biggest challenges I had when I was younger was it was more of just the impressing of those around me, right? So like my pops he was working for Morgan Stanley at the time. My mom was a stay-home mom, and I at least was always taught that, to be successful, you need that school degree. You need to go through the ropes, get your college degree, and go on and go make
Right.
a good amount of money, right? And I always knew, dude, deep down that that wasn't going to be in my cards. Just
Right.
from it, you could say, like goofing off in school, but just there was never that deep interest. And I know several people didn't necessarily enjoy the studying and enjoy the homework, but
One of them.
you could tell, yeah,
Guilty.
right, yeah. You could tell that there's a difference between those that have that long-term vision, knowing that's their path, and those that don't, right? And mine was certainly one that I knew deep down, even though I tried to go through that path, it just wasn't for me. So that was always going to be something I knew was going to be a challenge, and it was definitely a challenge being able to just make my steps along the way for that.
Yeah, totally. And I can see that as a challenge, especially because we get pressured, at least our generation did to a certain extent, to go through college, right? Like the ideal, I just talked about this on a previous podcast that I'll be releasing soon, as to what this gentleman calls the American lie. And really what it is talking about how, you know, we were told that, all right, go to school, get a job, work for 40 years, collect your pension, and like pretty much like die, like
Yeah,
and life
for
doesn't
real.
have and life doesn't have to be like that. And for people like you and I who are a little bit more entrepreneurial and go-getter mentality, that's just not a subscription that we were ever going to, order or be a part of, I feel like. And it sounds like for you, that kind of put a weight on your shoulders, like, okay, I have to perform and go to school, right? So, going through those motions until you finally realize that, you know what, this isn't for me. So you had the courage, it sounds like, to say, I'm not going to go that path and I'm going to go my own way.
Oh, dude, of course, yeah. And the biggest thing was just knowing that what that was going to lead to was a lot of temporary disappointment, a lot of, feeling as if you weren't good enough or you failed, had those expectations of you almost, right? So it was a hurdle to get through, not just doing it, but even the preparation leading to it of having that conversation was, yeah, it was definitely a moment of grit. You
And that can be a challenge in itself. When we talk about underdog stories, it doesn't have to be, this David and Goliath story, per se, that everybody perceives that way. We all fight these little internal battles or battles within our family dynamics and expectations from other people, expectations from society that, sometimes it's just not in the cards of what we want to do. What would you say to people out there in the audience, Matt? What would you say to them for what kind of mindset would they have to develop in order to move past moments like that? What actions did you take or mindsets did you develop in order to say, "Hey, I have to do this for me," you know?
Yeah, yeah. So the first one is I believe when you have something that deep inside you, that voice, it could be the voice in your head or the gut feeling you have or whatever is holding heavy on your heart to go achieve it. It's something greater than you telling you to do that, right? And I believe that we're all responsible to follow some sort of mission on this planet for while we're here. So that was one thing that helped. The second one was to understand it is okay to fail, right? So, like, really adopting what we call a fail forward mentality of you're going to do something. It might not be the norm or it might not be what several of those around you approve of in the moment, but you
Right.
believe it. And in order to go achieve it, you have to be okay understanding that it's not going to be peaches and cream. It's not going to be a cakewalk to go achieve those things. You're going to fail along the way. And as long as you understand that it's a failing forward moment of something that's going to help you grow as a person, as a leader, as an athlete, whatever it is, that that alone gives me the confidence of knowing that I should feel good to go out there and pursue those things.
Right, and it's almost like a mental checklist that other people can say in their own mind, like, it's hard for some people to determine what their why is, and I think that they have to do that internal work before they set out on a mission of any kind and say, "Hey, why am I gonna do what I'm about to do?" For example, boxing, right? Both of us, you know, who signs up to get punched in the face, right? It was something that personally found me, and we've talked about that, of course, but really with you, I'm curious. I know dad has a boxing background, but what what brought you into boxing, Matt? What made you decide, like, okay, it's one thing to be a fan and grow up watching it, but to get in the ring and have somebody stand in front of you and throw punches at you, what drove you to get into boxing at 13 years old?
Uh,
Because I didn't get till later.
honestly, yeah, honestly, man, the funny thing was boxing wasn't the original interest. So I wanted to learn how to defend myself. I think it was what, 13 years old, so it should be 7th or 8th grade, I think. But at that time I was, I just school and different people you talk to, just I wanted to learn how to defend myself. So what was the original interest was MMA, right? There were a few people that were doing that. I saw UFC on TV. I always knew about boxing, but I just thought that that was like, damn, dude, this guy knows how to fight, right? And my parents, I knew far none, they weren't going to support signing me up for any sort of gym that involved full contact like that, right? So so I'm searching these gyms up. I'm searching these gyms. All of the MMA gyms are sitting like 180, $225 a month, right? And now to us, that seems like, yeah, dude, some yeah. But dude, at 13 years old, you have no job. You're still like shoveling snow and walking people's dogs for $10 and you're loving your life. But I remember stumbling upon the Knights of Columbus, right? And that
Yeah.
gym was $20 a month, or $3 a day. So I actually used to just keep my lunch money that my parents gave me, which was $3, $4, right? And I would save that money to go to the gym. They made the promise that they would drive me to the gym as long as I could pay for it. So it actually was, I landed on boxing and it ended up becoming something that snowballed into what it is today, right? But it's funny how that works, man. Like, yeah, I started with the interest of doing MMA, and I'm so happy I did it, to be honest, from what boxing just has given me as a person, as a leader, and all the things that you learn in the gym and out of the gym and the people you've got to meet along the way. I don't regret one freaking second of stepping foot in that gym.
Oh, no, absolutely not, man. And just for the audience to know, you and I are about 4 years apart in age. And when you were getting in at 13, I was just getting in at 17. And, boxing brought our friendship, a lifelong friendship, through the love of a sport and duking it out and the sparring sessions we had, right? So, and it started at Knights of Columbus and just meeting each other there and developing a relationship, So I agree. I never regret any second of, my boxing journey. You mentioned, wanting to get into it for self-defense. Was there any like pressure in school for you of getting into fights, or was it just something that you wanted to do you felt like would develop your confidence or courage?
I think it was a confidence thing for sure. I definitely think it was a confidence thing.
What was your first experience sparring and what do you remember of it?
I remember getting my ass beat, dude. I remember, I remember my first sparring session, I think was, who the hell was it? Do you remember Felipe from the gym? He was a small dude, super fast, won some of the goals. I think he went to win the Golden Gloves for a year. I sparred him, but I think I sparred somebody else before it. The first time was an ease in, there was supervision. It was just my first time. But I remember the first time getting hit and having that headache after the sparring session. I also remember realizing how tired it is to be in the ring and spar, right? Like if you haven't been through that, it's really hard to speak in that perspective when you've never actually been through it. I was so tired, man. I remember just I thought 3 3-minute rounds were nothing. Like, oh, 9 minutes of activity. Yeah, I could go do that.
Yeah, no big deal.
And by the second round, man, I was huffing, puffing, like almost begging to get out of there. And John, John, dude, John wasn't going to let me get out of there after the round. So, so yeah, that's what I remember, being tired and getting hit in the face a lot.
It's so wild though, because you would think that, first of all, most people, the idea of being tough, right? People think, flexing and muscles was tough. And, people would look at you and I, we were built very similar and be like, you guys box, you guys are skinny, like little blinks, like, what are you doing? Boxing, fighting people, people that were heavier would challenge us and they get in the ring and learn real quick, because they never experienced it. Like you said, 3 minutes is a long time when you're having to, use your feet, use your brain, use your lungs, use your hands, move, think about what the other person might be doing. And the first time you spar, you're not even really thinking about what they're doing. You're just trying to make it through. I remember my first time sparring getting my ass kicked by Dave. You remember Dave? And I'll never forget it. He hit me with a mean body shot and I dropped and was winded. And what's crazy to me is we both, I guess just due to our personalities, we both still continued, right? What made you, what was one of the hardest things, I guess, to overcome early on, and what made you continue in the sport? Even after realizing the first time you sparred, like, holy crap, this is challenging.
Yeah, man. I think that the camaraderie in a boxing gym is unlike anything I've ever been able to. I could say triathlon is the closest thing, but even that aside, when there's a common thing that you do after you're done with every round, you touch gloves for the most part, right? And at the end of the sparring session, you usually talk shop after you shoot it a little bit, and you go back, you train, and I just remember that no matter how bad you might have looked in the ring, you got a level of respect for even having that courage to get in the ring, right? Because not many people would even do that step, and I think that alone, not beating me down, but more so, acknowledging you went through that. Yeah, you talked about what you did wrong because you were part of the gym, and as a coach, that's your job. But it was such a way to have an open invitation to want to come back, right? And want to keep trying. So that of course, kept me motivated of like, yeah, even though I might have felt like I looked stupid or I felt like I looked however, I know that they like are supportive of that and supportive of me and want me to come back to the gym. And that when you have somebody that's willing to do that for you, you want to show up.
Yeah, having the coach element, even like Sizzle and Sal Lopez, he was always there for me in my corner. And really, like, outside of the coach piece, you and I, right? We started developing a relationship over boxing. We started running, we were sparring regularly, doing hand pads for each other because I think we just had a sincere interest in getting better and then also helping one another because we understood the struggles we went through early on with boxing, and it was something that we loved and enjoyed and wanted to uplift each other. So 100% agree with you on the camaraderie element that you get from the boxing world. And I'm sure you're experiencing that now in the triathlete world. And we'll get into that when we talk a little bit more about that. I'm curious, Matt, you competed as an amateur boxer. What brought you to take it from, okay, hobby, spar here and there and get better, but take it to the next level. And I want to compete because some people just go and take boxing classes, or even spar to just quote unquote stay in shape. As nutty as that sounds, get punched in the face, stay in shape, right? But what made you take it to the next level and decide to compete? And what was it ultimately like for you to compete in amateur boxing?
Yeah, man. So I remember I kept showing up to the gym and I started to get naturally better. I didn't necessarily have a dedicated coach. John was working with the pros and John was working with some of the established amateurs that were part of the gym. And we had Ron there, who was hand pad guy,
Yeah.
loved doing mitts with Ron, man. And then we
Yeah.
had Tommy there and we had Ramon. And I remember they'd come around and they'd give you pointers and things like that. I just kept working and working and working. I guess I naturally started to get a little bit better and progressed. And I remember Tommy came up to me randomly one day and was just like, "Does anybody in this gym train you?" And I was like, "No, no, they don't. Would you want me to train you? I think you could be pretty good." And I was like, "Yeah, I would love that, man." And he was like, "Let's get in the ring and do some mitts." And we did mitts and we clicked, dude. We clicked with chemistry. We clicked with like the style of, yeah, we clicked with the style of coaching. And, I just put my trust in him, right? It wasn't even necessarily me saying, "Oh, I can't wait to fight. I can't wait to fight." But it was, the belief in the coaches there that thought I could go and do that competitively and be successful doing it. So that's kind of what gave me the itch to compete. Funny story is, I wasn't even part of that gym the first time I ever competed, but started there. You know what I mean?
Sure. Sure. Well, it's again showing the power of relationships, right? In the sport and the camaraderie again. And somebody reaching into you and into your ear and saying, "Hey, I think you could be great at this," and inspiring you to take it to that next level, it sounds like is what really drove you to compete. And ultimately, Matt, what were the biggest, what was it like to compete in amateurs, and what were some of the biggest lessons for you after, looking back now and doing it?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I should have competed so much more than I did, man. I should have. Yeah, I should have competed so much more. To only say that I have just 3 amateur fights, two of them aren't even really on the books, if you will.
Well, 3 more than most people will ever have.
Yeah, yeah, but sticking with the one that was on the books, it was. I look at it like the anticipation is where the fear stems from, right? So like there was definitely a lot of fear, but it wasn't a fear of getting. It wasn't a fear of anything like that. It was the fear of just the anticipation, right? The weighing, making weight, making your fight getting canceled, which in our case, when we trained together for the gloves, dude, I think I had what 3 separate times where we showed up and you showed up and Dom showed up and none of our guys showed up. So it's like, it's all that anticipation. It's all that anticipation. Like, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? Oh shit, it's happening. And it's like, just that was the buildup was where the most anxiety came from. And, having all my friends there, there was a little crew that came, if you remember, my parents were there. And I think that the nerves of impressing was the biggest thing. But looking back, man, like it's just like anything, as soon as it's done, it's always, that wasn't as bad as I thought. I'm so glad I did. I can't wait to do it again. Right. So yeah, that's what I remember leading up to the gloves at, I think it was North Bergen. We fought at Global.
Yeah, we were at Global. It's so funny though, Matt, because you I'm not saying you discredited yourself at all, but you said, I only had 3 fights. Again, that's 3 more than most people would have. But what people don't realize is regardless of fighting in the amateurs, the amount of training and sparring and energy and effort that goes into being successful at literally any, right? But in the boxing world, there's all that behind the scenes. And then when you show up to the fight, that I don't want to even call it anxiety because I know exactly what you're talking about because I've experienced it. I lost to Garrett Dugan in the semifinals of Diamond Gloves because of it. I was too tense and he dropped me with a body shot as we closed out the third round. We actually talked about it when I saw him at the Hall of Fame dinner. He was there and we talked about it. But it's something that people don't realize is, in anything that you do, the time, effort, energy that you put in behind the scenes, there's always going to be those butterflies to perform and that anxiety to perform. And then once you get up there and do it, like, the minute you step in that ring and that first exchange that you have with somebody, all of a sudden it goes away, like, but yeah, those are interesting points that you make obviously about it. To close out on the boxing piece, what would you think is the number one lesson you learned from boxing, during your time of actively competing and training and sparring prior to getting into triathlons?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was discipline for sure. I remember Salaji used to go around and he used to call it the 3 Ds: discipline, dedication, determination. And he used to just ramble that at all random times in the gym. And discipline is what sticks with me the most because I think when you look at discipline from the athletic career and professional career, but that was training and running and the eating and cutting the weight and all that stuff, were not necessarily things I always looked forward to doing, right? But you did it. You did it. And that alone, that transferable skill set happens to people every single day where like you're not going to want to do everything that's on your calendar, on your agenda for the day. But it's the discipline that you have to go do it that creates the success for you down the road, right? So that lesson alone in boxing by far was the most important.
Yeah, Jim Rohn says it really great. Work harder on yourself than you do on your job, right? So working that hard on yourself to be great at something, whether it's personal, professional, or in a sport, is paramount. So, I commend you for that. And I learned a lot from you, of course, through the years boxing together. Anybody that's listening to this, you can go on Matt's or my Instagram and go back years and see bouts of us sparring each other and clips and highlights. And, those are memories I'll carry with me and cherish forever, man, because, the camaraderie that you and I created from that is truly special, lifelong friends from it. So, you mentioned what that did for you from a professional standpoint. You have also, it's incredible, right? Like you have an incredible, discipline from boxing, and you also have an incredible business mind for somebody that didn't want to go to school, Where did you start developing your business acumen? What was your first job, and ultimately when did you start, growing into more of a business professional, I would say, who understood, different elements of business?
Yeah, for sure. So I was I carried a ton of different jobs. But my first official job, I would say, is at GNC, right? I remember walking into there, somebody that lived a healthy lifestyle, worked out all the time, and was super in. And I walked in there at 16. They were like, "Nah, you gotta be 18 years old to work here." My 18th birthday, I walked in and I was like, "I'm back."
Wait, so you went at 16 years old to get a job from them? They told you no, and then you waited 2 years and went back to them?
All while
Wow,
bouncing around.
yeah, but you wanted it bad, clearly, because it
Oh
sounds
yeah,
like, again, alignment with what you were doing in life. You were boxing at the time too, right?
yeah. I was boxing at the time and working out, and transitioned every now and then to lifting weights and wanting to get big, and then going back to boxing. But yeah, GNC was like that was the cool spot. And that was like I'm around supplements. I'm around people that work out. Like it's just cool, right? So, 18 years old, I went back, and if you remember Harry, yeah, he was the store manager at Milltown GMC, and
Right.
I remember he hired me. It was a really like just very casual interview, and he was like, "Yeah, we're gonna have you work here." That's how it started, man. And I guess along the way, like when it came to business acumen, I didn't find that really until I became an assistant manager at East Brunswick Mall GNC. So I started at Milltown, you know, just very passionate about it. I thought that when I got the job, I at that time thought it was going to be the transferable skill set into school, going for exercise science and PT and nutrition and all that. Right. So this was right up my alley. So I was like taking notes, studying, doing all the things about supplementation and nutrition, certain ingredients and herbs and all that. And I also started to have the confidence to build the value in it to teach others about when they came in. So that's where the salesmanship, the ability to drive sales while being in a solution based environment like GNC is something I believed in. My numbers were good, right? So numbers are good. So, numbers are up. Boss notices, big boss notices, called me up, is like, "Hey, we have an assistant manager position open, GNC in the mall. You obviously know how to sell. Do you want the role?" That's how casual it was. Now, that leader was at GNC for a long period of time, and my upbringing wasn't necessarily strung from great leadership, but it was a little bit more money, and I was like, "Hell yeah, I'll do that." So, role under the manager I was with in the mall, that's when I started to learn about, being in any managerial capacity is not just about doing one thing, but it's about doing a multitude of things, right? And executing a multitude of different things at a high level to help your business operate successfully. So, learning not just customer facing things around sales performance and KPI performance and all that, but also learning operational compliance and shrink and inventory accuracy and all those things that help your business thrive to be successful. So that's where that the business acumen slowly started to come as it was more so being taught in a very kinesthetic way, right? Like it was just learn as I go, not necessarily a sit
Mhm.
down and let me teach you, right?
Well, a lot of people, Matt, wouldn't have. There's one thing that you said though, was that you went home and you would study the ingredients and the supplements and things like that. A lot of people wouldn't have gotten into. Yes, it might have been an easy interview for the assistant manager role, but a lot of people wouldn't have taken the initiative to do what you did, right? Like a lot of people would view that as a job, a job, rather than let me take this opportunity to invest in myself, prove my skills, get better at selling by guiding people to their desired end result, and then ultimately have somebody recognize that, right? Because your numbers were up because you believed in what you were doing. And I always tell this, and I'm sure you do right now with Trek, and we'll get into that, is you got to believe in what you're selling. And if you know
Oh,
your
dude.
product and you know the value that it brings, it makes it so much easier to sell, and it's more like guiding rather than selling. Would you agree?
Yeah. Oh, dude, I'll be honest, even today, man, like, and I know this might sound a little harsh, but I don't even have time for people that work in the company I work for, or work for me, or have worked for me, if you will, that don't believe in what they're doing. To me, I almost owe it to that person to get them out of the business so they can be happier and go find something that they do believe in, right? So it's like, if you yeah, I just very small tolerance for that, and I think that when you believe in what you're talking about, it it not only makes the job fun, but it gives you the motivation to know that there's always more you could be doing, right? So,
But what about Matt? Like, we have coming from the automotive industry, you and I have talked about some of the parallels in your career being on the retail side, GNC, Match Sherman, now Trek, and what I went through with retail automotive. The thing in retail automotive, unfortunately, is sometimes you'll have somebody who's toxic to the culture, could care less about the product, but they're a top performer still. They might even be transactionally minded over relationship minded, but they put numbers up every month. You know, is that something that you've ever tolerated before? Or do you just cut the toxin out like it's a poison and get rid of it because it's bad for the culture?
yeah, so that those are always some of the toughest ones to deal with, right? Because you have this top performer, you have the potential, they have the skill, right? But you also have to look at it on the other side of the coin. They're going to give you results short term, but is what they're doing going to be sustainable for your success as a team, right? When you're in, at least in the capacity that I'm in, you have anywhere from 12 to 30 stores, 12 to 30 different individual leaders that all learn and are all different, right? The way I view it is, the longer you let that person on the team, the more opportunity and time that they have to be a negative detractor and influence to the other managers that are trying to do something, right?
Yeah,
So,
and openly dissenting employees. Yeah.
exactly, right? So if you have a manager that, like, let's say, is a B player, and the person who's driving performance from just the performance standpoint is technically an A player because the numbers are there, but the attitude is an A. If the B player's attitude is a B and they're B and B, follow me, then that person who has the F attitude rubs off on that B attitude. And slowly that B attitude becomes a C and then a D. And then you have another employee that is now a negative detractor. So it's just like cancer, dude. It spreads, right? So you have to do what? You have to do the surgery and remove the cancer.
And cut it out.
And cut it out, man. And it's, sometimes when you are also held responsible for driving results, and you have a boss and you have a company that is looking at your results every single day, it can create a hesitation to want to go and do that. But you have to know that it is going to set you up way better in the long run by just ripping the band-aid off and moving on and finding somebody that will go in there. You can develop to be an A player in sales, but is going to give you the A attitude as you're doing it, right? So, yeah, it's not always easy.
No, of course not. And a lot of times, and a lot of times, business leaders don't cut the toxin out because they don't want to ruin the numbers. And then even worse than that, sometimes is that individual ends up getting promoted to a leadership role because were a high performer rather than a leader. Being a leader of people is so different than being a manager who's really just a task watcher, right? And making sure you're just checking boxes off and completing the individual tasks, right? So for you, you were a high performer who is also, in my opinion, a leader of people because you genuinely care about driving results, not just for the business, but for the individual themselves. And I commend you for that because I've watched your growth since GNC and moving now into Trek. And I'm just excited for you into what you're building into the future with them because it's so in alignment with being a triathlete, which we haven't even talked about yet. But what would you say for somebody looking to get into the business world who might sales, not necessarily even in a leadership role, what would be the biggest piece of advice you would give to them early on in their career or if they're struggling to perform?
I would say the biggest thing is, in retail or in any career, especially a sales driven environment, we all have something that is a big blessing and a big curse, and that's our ego, right? We all have an ego. And I think the number one most important thing that I learned somewhat the hard way is knowing that it is okay to ask for help, right? You often, more often than not, you will be surrounded in your environment of your company that you're in. You will be surrounded by those that are currently doing better than you, have more
Right.
experience than you, and probably know the answers to the problems that you're going through. But if you don't take that initiative to humble yourself and show humility and pick up the phone or schedule a meeting and get that intimate time to have that open and honest conversation, you're going to fail. Period.
Mm.
Right? So if you're somebody that is in a job right now and you're struggling, you have to ask yourself, have I done everything in my power to branch out to the resources that I currently have and embrace those things, right? Even though it might sting the ego a little bit, it doesn't feel good to tell somebody, dude, I'm struggling. Can you help me? Right. But if you take the leap of faith and go do that, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna, number one, you're showing others that you care, genuinely care, right? And that alone is, be helpful for you. But number two, you're going to begin to get the support that you need. And when others know how much you're trying to work for something and you're struggling, they're going to be even that much more eager to come and help you. Right. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Number one. And number two is check your ability in that life mirror of being coachable. Right. You have to be coachable. If you are not coachable, if you think that you know the way or you push back on every little thing that is told to you, you're going to fail, right? You have to be a seeker of knowledge and you have to be uh, just extremely motivated to listen and learn and not think that you know the way, right? You're not going to agree with everything that everybody always tells you, but you have to listen and be coachable. So be coachable and don't let your ego get in the way when it comes time. And if you need to ask for help, ask for help.
You know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the parallels to boxing again, because if we just got in the freaking ring and got in with somebody that we could just beat the crap up out of every single time, we would never get better, right?
Yeah.
We would just feel like, yeah, well, nobody can beat me. Well, are you challenging yourself at all? In the business world, are you putting yourself in rooms with people who are smarter than you or have different philosophies and ideas who can engage with you? And then the next thing is not only are you getting in that room, but afterwards, are you networking with them? And networking, people get confused like it's exchanging business cards. No, like you said, do you reach out for help? Are you active? Networking is activating the relationships that you made, So if I'm in a business setting and I don't activate those relationships and I don't ask for help, it comes off as number one, do I really care? People are questioning your level of care. And then number two, you're doing yourself a disservice by letting your ego get in the way of asking for that help. So I absolutely love those points, Matt. Talk to me a little bit about, now GNC, Mattress Firm, and then now you're at Trek. Talk to me about how you transitioned into Trek and what has been your favorite thing about working there so far.
Yeah. Man. So I was working
And I
in
love your
GNC.
fight.
Thanks, man. That's the beauty, dude.
I
The
love
beauty.
it.
I
That
rode
thing's
once on
fast. I
it.
can tell.
It's fast. It's a beauty.
You're
So
like Ricky
I
Bobby.
was
I want to go fast. I want to go fast. Sorry.
I want to go fast. So I was with GNC for 10 years, right? I had a great trajectory there. I was, out of the 10 years I was with GNC, I was a district manager for 4. Been everywhere on the Northeast. It was, Philly. Then I went to New York City. Then I went back to Philly, Delaware, and Jersey. Then I was kind of stuck for a moment. So then it was, oh, we can relocate you to Orlando. So then I go to Orlando and it was just a whirlwind. Every market, was turned around and fixed and did some really great things and have some great success stories and stuff. But I kind of got to the point where I was like, GNC just went through bankruptcy. We were in the middle of the pandemic. We were closing a bunch of stores. And I just kind of was like, you know, is this it? Right? Is this it for my career? Is this where I'm landing for my entire career? Or is there something else out there that I can go do?
Also, if you don't mind me interjecting, it probably was getting to a certain degree not a challenge as much anymore, right? Especially
Oh
with
yeah,
what was
man.
going on. So
Yeah.
for somebody like you want to be pressed, you want to be challenged.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, don't get me wrong. I love GNC. If it wasn't for GNC, specifically, it wasn't if it wasn't for the mentor that I had at GNC, I would not be where I am today. Right. But and again, this is not a knock on GNC for any fellow former employees that may listen to this. But you get hired when it's possibly a consistent carrot that gets dangled in front of your face, right? So I kind of knew it was time to move on. And, I was starting to get a little homesick being in Florida, and me and, my wife, Gina, we were talking about like the future and possibly having kids. And when all that time comes, like, oh, we're going to have a wedding here in Florida where nobody's going to come. Right. So we were starting to look around, possibly reloading back to the Northeast. And it just so happened that mattress firm reached out on LinkedIn. Their recruiter reached out to engage in a conversation based off of my background. And
Hmm.
one thing led to another. I ended up liking the boss that was going to be my boss that I interviewed with. I liked the culture that they said they practiced and they preached during the interview. And I was like, I think I could do this, right? Beds, I don't know. I was like, but the leadership was really intriguing because it was right up my alley, right? Of what they look for in their district leaders. So got up and we moved. So I was there for about 2 years. And listen, I would still be there if it wasn't for Trek. But the passion, how much it brewed, how much this brewed, but other way, this brewed into doing it in my life and understanding that in order to be happy, really trying to find something to where you can have almost a seamless, perfect work life integration, right?
Mm.
And that was Trek. So I just, I just went on LinkedIn, man, and I researched everybody that worked for Trek. And I tried to like stalk and see like where's the Northeast? Where's the Northeast guy? And I finally found him. Yeah, his name's Chad. And I stumbled upon Chad in LinkedIn and I was like, man, I never would do this. I sat there, I typed up the draft like 5 freaking times, dude. And I'm like, I just wanted to soft introduction to myself, let them know who I was, little bit about my background. Yeah, and deep, deep interest in wanting to have a conversation. And you could tell, a person and you could tell a company and what they represent with the fact that within minutes he reached back out. Right? I thought the dude was never going to answer. I was like, I'm just going to go in and just send him a message. He reached out in the matter of minutes, and the next thing you know is we're on a phone call. And we're just talking and getting to know each other a little bit. He's asking me a little bit about work, telling me a little bit about Trek. And right from that moment, I knew I wanted to not only work for Trek, but work for him. Right. And he pointed me in the direction of another DM who's currently now my peer, of just building a network of a relationship with him. His name's Donnie. And, from the moment I reached out to him, which was February, there was no positions open, but having that relationship and sticking with that consistency of wanting to build that relationship, you fast forward into, I believe it was August, that I finally saw the position open up, right? There was a position in North Carolina. There was a position in Philly. I applied for both. I interviewed for both. And then when the time came to choose, I said, hey, I would love to stay in the Northeast, right?
Right.
And now we're with Trek. So
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's funny if I waited for the position to open and I never reached out, I I guarantee you I probably wouldn't be working for Trek.
Yeah. Well, again, there's just so many things to unpack in what you said. Going back to even the mentor piece, how important mentors are in our lives, and we can touch upon that as well. But then also, people don't usually quit their jobs; they quit their bosses because you made a very interesting point about you want to follow this man. Like you messaged him, and then you got the right energy from him, and said, "Hey, to yourself, it sounds like they have the kind of culture I want to be part of. And it's right in alignment with what, I'm now doing, going towards being a triathlete, when you had first started at the time, entering that space, and then just your ability to be proactive, right? Like saying, this is what I want. People talk about, you mentioned the work life integration. There is no such thing as work life balance. There shouldn't be if you have the right type of of career because it should integrate with everything that you do in your life. And I know that might be challenging for some people out there, but you had already knew in your heart and trusted your gut enough to say, this is what I want to do. I'm going to be proactive and reach out to this individual. And then now look, fast forward, and here you are, you're a district manager with them, and rightfully so. Talk to me a little bit about, what's the culture like there, that really, now that you're in the industry and in the organization, what's your favorite thing about working with Trek and within that culture?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I love is the intensity of being successful as a business, right? We are a business. We aren't just a bunch of dudes and women in the bike shop just casually hanging out. We are a business and we want to be successful as a business. We want to be here forever, right? We want to have that thumbprint in the world and that change in the world. And that's the first thing. But the culture, you think to our mission statement, right? Which is we build only product we love, provide incredible hospitality to our customers, and change the world by getting more people on bike. And a lot of companies have a mission statement, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean they live the mission statement.
Not everybody can repeat it in the company either, like you just did.
Yeah,
I
right.
just want to make one of that.
No, dude, it's actually no. I'm just kidding. I was gonna say it's
It's not
tattooed
right here.
here, but
Just
no.
kidding.
But, but no, like many companies have a mission statement, but they don't live it, right? Trek lives it. Everything that Trek does, for in the moment, for good or for bad, right, or for better or for worse, is with the intention to ensure that we are living through that mission statement. That is what I freaking love about it. The other side of that is for as tense as it is, right? And the expectations we have to show up our best selves every day, they also encourage you to understand that it is also okay to have fun, right?
Yeah.
So being out there with your people on bikes, encouraging your team to ride, being able to just, you know, not have the pressure of dressing in a suit and tie and being super PC and actually talking to your team like people and getting
Yeah.
to know your team. It's it's a really cool culture, man. Like I love being a part of something that you have a goal and you're very keen in on that goal and you are serious about that goal. But along the journey to get to that goal, you're going to have a pretty damn good time along the way. And, it inspires me to be able to breathe that onto my team as best as I can.
Yeah, well, you're that type of person that wants to, like me, lift other people up, right? And when you see somebody struggling, you'll be the first person to reach out, even if they don't ask you for help, to say, "Hey, how can I help you? How can what are you struggling with? And how do we move towards a solution rather than being focused on what the problem might be, right?" So very solution oriented and detail oriented that you are, Matt, as I've noticed about you as being friends for as long as we have. So I feel like just the alignment that you have with the culture there, like you said, it's right up your alley. Um, Talk to me a little bit about, now being a triathlete, right? You were a boxer for so long and then turning the page in the script into getting on a bicycle, getting in the water and running, what drove you to being a triathlete, and pursuing this, what started it for you?
Yeah. So the pandemic was the initial interest, but it didn't start until I was in Florida, where, you know, during the pandemic, it was hard to box, right? Living in Philly, all the gyms were closed. Then they opened Jersey, so you had to cross the bridge to go to just a recreational gym. And it was kind of hard to stay motivated from a competitive perspective in boxing. I kept training boxing, but I found myself running more, being outside more. And the next thing I know is I'm in Florida and, trying to find a boxing gym there. And I wasn't vibing there. And then I started to think, man, I'm 27 years old. I'm getting a little older. I've only had 3 fights. Like, is this really going to be something that I could ever see myself making money with? Or just, do I want to continue to get hit in the face for free? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And
Not get paid for it. Yeah.
yeah. And it's funny, man. A store manager at GNC at the time said to me, "Matt, you live in Florida, you run. Why don't you get a bike? Everybody here in Florida has a bike." I was like, huh, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. So,
Right.
dude, next thing I know is like literally within a week, I drive to my local store, Now it was called David's World Cycle, and Trek acquired them. So now they're all Trek stores.
Wow, how funny is that?
Yeah. Right. So I bought a Trek. It was a hybrid bike, nice fitness bike. And I just thought it was going to be something to complement my running as a workout. Then I was like, I want to get faster. So then I went and bought a road bike.
You got competitive, your competitive streak kicked on.
Then it started to turn on. Yeah. And I was
How
like, all right,
fast can I go? Yeah.
yeah. I was like, well, this road bike, looking online now, this road bike is like a cheap little entry road bike. I need to get a good one. So then I went back and got a good road bike, and it started to snowball. I rode for a while, really loved being outside 40 miles and understanding what you can experience on two wheels, how far you can go just pedaling. You just that sense of freedom, right? On the bike, and nothing in your head. It just turned off. There was nothing in my mind going on other than the road in front of me, right? And I remember I was like, on certain days I ran too, and I was like, okay, I'm biking, I'm running, I'm biking, I'm running. And then I found a YouTube video of Lionel Sanders, who is I am a huge fan. He's a huge inspiration to me. He's a professional triathlete. And I remember watching a YouTube video of him doing like some insane shit, dude. And I remember he was telling me about his upbringing and some of the challenges he went through and how he went back to running as an outlet, snowballed. And the workouts he was doing were so crazy, man. And
Right.
I was like, that is the closest thing to brutality that boxing was. I want to do that. I was like, I want to do that. So, I started to push myself. I started to do research. I started to try to find a coach. And you fast forward, and now it's completely snowballed into being not a full time, but a very highly competitive age group triathlete who is aspiring to, take this as far as I can. I have the right people in my corner to be able to do it. I think I have the right work ethic to be able to do it. And, yeah, we'll see what this thing does, but it is snowballed.
I have a little bit of an inside edge on you because I've shared the ring with you, and I know how tough you are. I know how much heart you have, and I know how determined you are when you set your mind to something and what that ends up doing. And I've watched your transformation over the years. And for me, it's been nothing but inspiring, man. And it's part of the reason I wanted to have you on the show because I think people, if they listen to you and then they look at their own lives and say, wow, like, look at the mindset Matt, maybe there's adjustments I can make in my own life. And even if it's just one person, man, you're definitely an inspiration to many on the journey that you've been on and what you've just shared with us just here in this one episode, right? And we'll definitely have more moving forward in the future. But staying on the topic of triathletes and triathlons, what was the biggest initial challenge that you had when you first started doing triathlon training that you didn't experience previously as a boxer?
Yeah, getting in the water, man. So, it's, we breathe as humans on land, right? That's what we're accustomed to doing. You have to know how to do for an hour in water you can't stand in, and you can't see it, right? So that's nerve-wracking as hell. Right? And there's there's hundreds and hundreds of people around you bumping into you along the way, and you maybe have lifeguards on the kayak. So if you're struggling, you're toast. You better pray to God that you put that hand up and they're coming to rescue you. So the nerves of right, knowing that with no swim experience, with no swimming background, the only experience I ever had in the water was playing with friends in a pool. That is it. I didn't go to swim lessons when I was a kid. I didn't learn the doggy paddle and floating on your back and all that stuff. It was just playing in the pool as a kid. So to learn the finesse of swimming and to learn how to be uncomfortable was a big challenge.
Well, I know that you already knew how to be uncomfortable because of what you went through with your transition in boxing and also your transitions in business. You always had a willingness to you to be uncomfortable. Another thing I admire about you. And, in the water, like I would fight anybody in a ring, but to get in the water, I am somebody personally who's like, no, I can't see the bottom. I'm not doing that. So the nerves, even with, in this past year, another thing you inspired me to do is go and compete in running, right? And even just lining up, like you think about, you go out and you run just on your own in the street, compared to you line up for a race and the
Yep.
feeling of it reminded me of stepping in the ring. I wasn't going to get punched,
100%.
but
100%.
it's still there.
Yep. It's a dude, it's a very addictive, it's a dopamine rush. That's what it is. It's a dopamine rush. And it's yeah, it 100%, like I said, right? Like with boxing and the closest thing to that level of commitment, dedication, training, discipline, pain, all those things, I think triathlon is the closest to it. And the cool thing about triathlon is you could do this thing till your body can't walk anymore, which if you live the right lifestyle, hopefully is very, very long time from now, right? You can't always get punched in the face at 60, 50, 70 years old. You could still do a 5K, 10K, half Ironman and all that stuff. So, so I'm looking forward to just being on this journey for a long time.
Yeah, well, listen, it's a lifestyle, and like you said, work-life integration, being a triathlete is a perfect work-life integration and lifestyle for what you do as a leader at Trek, and all the underlying lessons between the 2 that you've already identified, talking here is really remarkable, and, I feel like you created your reality. Would you say that you did yourself?
I think that I've had help along the way. I think that I've been empowered by an entity out there that has guided me along a path. That's my belief. But I chose to listen and follow it. Right. So in some sense, yes, I think I absolutely have done that.
Sure. Yeah, and I also think that that entity out there that is listening to you says, "Okay, Matt, this is what you want to do." Not only were you speaking it into existence, but your actions were as well. And I think that that's a very important lesson for everybody listening to take away is, the saying you want to do something and then the hunger to actually want to go do it and then take the action that's necessary, is what brings the things you want into manifested into your reality. And I don't want to get too ethereal with that, but it's the truth. You can say that you want things, but it's the action that you take, and you are a prime example of that because look at your work life integration and how blessed you are to do something that you love both physically and both as a professional, personal life and professionally. So it's truly remarkable, Matt. And thank you for sharing that. As we close out, I have some more general questions. I want to first and foremost thank you for always being gracious with your time, and I'm super grateful that we get to do this together. But as we close out here, they got some great American Underdog questions. I think that will really help the audience potentially. So, number one, what's one thing you do today that your younger self wouldn't believe?
So I would say I today there's two things that I do. I know my younger self would be like, you're I would never do that. One is I love cold showers. Random, right? Love cold shower. Two is taking time to practice my spirituality. That came very late in life. That was not part of my younger life, right? So whether
Sure.
it's taking time in silence or taking time journaling or taking time meditating or, praying or whatever it is that you would do, doing that today, my younger self would have never done that.
Right. If you had a magic cell phone and you could leave yourself a voicemail for your younger self, what would you tell him?
I would say, and it's funny you bring this question up, man, because I think I still somewhat struggle with it today, but have gotten a lot better. But I would definitely tell my younger self that patience is key. Patience is key, and health is wealth. So, understanding that you have to be patient. Things aren't going to come overnight, like we've talked about over the past hour. It takes a lot of hunger and determination, and late nights, long hours, trials, tribulations, all those things to finally get you to your destination that you want to be in. And, you know, I know when I was younger, if I didn't get something immediately, I would often give up on it. I played guitar for a year, wasn't great at it, put it on the side, and now it has dust on it. Doing all these different things as a young kid. I just think that if I had more patience, I probably could have, even though I'm proud of where I am today, I could have seen, you know, a few other things through. Who knows what could have ever happened.
Yeah. What piece of advice would you give to somebody who might be currently going through challenges and obstacles that might be writing their own underdog story? If it's not something you already haven't mentioned, and it might just be what you just said with being patient, but maybe it's something else.
I think that that's a huge thing. Being patient. You have to be patient. We spoke about it very early on, but understanding that failing is an amazing thing. As long as you're failing forward and not repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, but you're using those to learn and grow from, be okay failing, right? Be okay failing in what you're doing. And the third one would be, you know, it's patience, it's being okay to fail, and it's to trust the process, right? There's typically a process that's lined out in order to be successful at something. Whatever you're looking to achieve in your life, somebody has done it for the most part, right? There's amazing entrepreneurs out there. There's amazing triathletes out there. There's amazing CFOs, CEOs, leaders out there. They laid you they laid you a blueprint. So trust the process, and don't give up on that. And I think that kind of coincides directly with patience.
Yeah, because like, you mentioned just now, success leaves clues, they say. And as long as we're willing to follow those clues and take that same or similar actions, it might be during, you might be taking similar actions that somebody took in the 1930s, like an Andrew Carnegie that was super successful, but the principles, even though the time is different, the principles stay the same. So that does lead me to my one of my last questions here, Matt, for you is who has inspired you, somebody that the most that you've listened to, whether it's reading a book or listening to audio, via audio, who's inspired you the most, and who right now at this stage of your life, who do you aspire to be most like potentially?
So I would say professionally, his name is Gene Gross. He was my uh, district manager, then my regional manager at GNC, and he inspired me to do this thing right as a leader. And the way he inspired me really is it's almost like I have a mission to do now, right? So at the time when I first met Gene, I was living in New Brunswick, the college ave days, which are we remember, and we had our fair share of fun, man, fair share of fun and silly decisions. It was good times. I don't regret any of them. But you think about that time and then also trying to be something in the workplace. And, I wasn't always showing up my best self to work and I was slacking a little bit, but I did my job and I did it well. And, I didn't know where I was going at that point. And he came in and I remember he sat me down in the back and he was like, a lot of people in the district have brought up your name and say you're the guy and all these different things. I was asked to run stores prior to his arrival, but they were all those district managers never believed. They were all the ones that were like, you need to give up boxing, you need to give up school. This is going to be full time. I was a jock in high school. And I had to deal with reality. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. I want to still be able to do these things. Right. And he was the first person that was like, why wouldn't you be able to do those things? Right. And he just was able to make sense of how you can be a leader, but also have a life. Right. And have that integration that we spoke about. I trusted him and I ran a store. Long story short, like I fell in love with that process of being a manager and being a leader and training and developing others. And, it was cool to be number one on a scorecard, but it was way cooler to watch somebody that worked for you go run their own store and be just as successful. Right. So, you know, starting to do that, he asked me, what do you want here? And I was like, I think I want to be a district manager. And he said, is if you trust me to develop you, I will get you to where you want to be. And I just opened the arms, man. I opened the arms and gave full commitment to learning and growing and trusting the process and being patient and all those things we just spoke about. And I went from an assistant manager making $10 an hour in Piscataway, New Jersey, to the district manager of Philadelphia in 2.5 years. Right.
Wow.
So I say all that because that conversation, right? He didn't need to have that conversation with me, right? And he did, and he invested his time into me. And how he inspires me today is if he did somebody like that, like if he did something like that with somebody like me, then I feel that I owe it to every single person that I work with to be able to do that same exact thing for them. I'm not in this position because I love, driving sales. Now, don't get me wrong, I do love driving sales. And I'm not in this position to visually merchandise stores, even though I do visually merchandise stores. I'm in this position to help other leaders get to where they want to go. That is by far the most fulfilling part about what I do. And, he has inspired me to have that vision and motivation every single day I show up. So that's, that's who inspires me.
Well, it sounds like you also aspire to be like him because you want to develop other future leaders and develop other people.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. I would say that's pretty accurate, especially from a professional perspective. And I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily say I aspire to be a person. And this can probably even be a conversation for another time that we can spend a long time talking about this. But you know, for me, as a person of faith, I aspire to be just a better person. That's
I love that.
and we have our, for me, I have my, we have principles and guidelines and, things that we have as resources to know the how to's, but just
Sure.
being able to aspire to be a better person in general is something that I'm always looking to do.
Yeah, no, I love that, Matt, because it's more of like an image you had in your mind of this best version of yourself, right? Whether it's spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, and it's aspiring to be like that. And the other thing that you identified too that I thought was really awesome was that, some of the best business leaders that I've met, in the last, especially in the last 3 years of my career, all say that the most impactful thing to them as business leaders is to create other leaders. All they wanna do is drive success for their people, and we're more in the business world, it's more about people than it ever is about profits, and, like, my mentor, somebody that's inspired me for the last 7 years, Sandy Sarami, none other than the solutionist, he's taught me, you gotta make a difference before you ever seek to make a dollar, and, there's just something so profound in really genuinely caring about people, and I think that that's at the heart of everything that you've described here, in terms of talking about who inspires you and who do you aspire to be like. So kudos to you, man. And I think that's an incredible lesson for the audience.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What's that quote? I don't know who wrote it, but it goes something like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." Right. So so you could be the smartest freaking person that's been put on this earth, but if you don't care about other people and you don't care to share that wisdom to help others get to the destination that they want to go to, I'm sorry, you're nothing.
Yeah, and it's also with not just your people, but like the clients we serve, right? I always say in the automotive industry, and also, we train salespeople in other industries. Definition from Jay Abraham, where he talks about the two definitions of between customer and client, and this is a whole nother conversation we can definitely have as well. But it's the definition of a customer is somebody that purchases a commodity or service. It's a transactional mindset. None of us have customers. You don't have customers that track. You have clients, and the definition of a client is by Webster's dictionary, is someone that is under the protection of another. It's a relationship based element, and it's your job to guide these individuals, right? So, the biggest impact you can have is teaching that to your people, and then it translates to how they interact with your clients. And it's our job to guide them to help them make the best decision possible for them. And then the sales drives itself.
Yeah. You could even, it's funny how it all can relate, but you can even take that a step further, and the people that work for you are your clients, right? So if you think about it, right? So, your job is to protect and lead them and have that relationship with them too. So it's funny how that kind of connects. But I 100% agree with you, and that's a great philosophy.
Yeah, man. We had a very unique and special synergy between the two of us in terms of our philosophies and ideology. And I of course genuinely appreciate that for the rest of my life. Matt, as we close out here, where can people find you and follow you, whether it's social media or another way, and where can they find you, in the professional world?
Yeah. So you can follow me and find me on Instagram. It's Matt Angstadt Try, and you can search me up on Facebook. So I have my Facebook and my Instagram, and looking forward to slowly beginning a YouTube channel that's going to kind of journey along the path of this thing we call triathlon. So that's kind of in the works. So looking forward to that. And then from a professional perspective, I have the luxury and the privilege of being able to be in so many different places up here in the Northeast. So I have South Jersey, Philly, PA, all the way up into Delaware as well. All the Trek stores that are in the nearby Northeast area. Any one of those stores, you tell them that Matt sent you, we'll make sure we take care of you. And that's where you can find me professionally. And, never hesitate to shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook. I love conversations like this. And Ron, to you, thank you so much for even allowing me to be a part of this conversation with you this evening. And I really enjoyed it.
It's my true honor, brother. I love you. And is there any final messages for the audience before we close out here?
Final message for the audience is, again, whatever journey you're on, whatever you want your destination to be, just remember to be patient. Remember to be okay failing, and remember to just trust the process. You are going to, we spoke a lot about certain things during this time together, and ultimately they are they are success stories, right? Like it felt good to be able to, even for me to even be able to, I don't get to share this with many people, right? So to be able to sit here and even talk gives me a moment of clarity of like, damn, I should be pretty proud of myself. But I want people to understand that it wasn't easy and it wasn't always fun, right? It wasn't always great days. Like it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. You have to understand that, like, in order to get to the destination you want, it's going to require a lot of work, a lot of patience, a lot of perseverance, a lot of dedication, a lot of discipline. So just don't give up on what you're trying to accomplish, because it's in arm's reach.
I love that, Matt. You've provided some incredible insights for the audience. Once again, I'd like to say thank you, Matt, and thank you everybody who's joined us for another incredible episode of Great American Underdog, where we share stories of strength and success. If you found value in this episode, please be sure to like it, subscribe to the channel for future content, and share it with somebody who you feel it could be an inspiration to as well. So once again, thank you everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you guys. Thank you.